This is the first time that I have risen to speak in the withdrawal bill, and I do so because I wish to add a little bit to what has already been said about Amendment 348. I do not intend to revisit the arguments of the previous humble address or the decisions taken by our Select Committee. That issue has been dealt with, but since the Shadow Minister hinted the opposition would come back to it, I do want to focus on the substance of the amendment and why I disagree with it so strongly. Sir David, my belief is that what Amendment 348 seeks is in effect without precedent in the history of negotiations by our country. For the amendment would require the government to publish its economic impact assessment of the policy options for withdrawal from the EU. And the missing words at the end are, quote, during our negotiations to withdraw from the EU. And those missing words matter because this is both a particularly important negotiation for our nation, nobody is in any doubt of that, and it is also at a particularly delicate time. The government, in fact, starts negotiations on both the implementation period and our future relationship soon after the new year. Now, on the other side of the negotiating table, the EU has made it absolutely clear that it will not be publishing all its research, and we will certainly therefore not see published any analysis, let alone an impact assessment, for example, of what no deal would mean to specific ports in North Europe, or any potential drop in GDP for the town of Calais, for example. And therefore, let me just develop the argument first, if I might, and then I will come back to him. And therefore, it is a curious affair that we should expect our own negotiating side to lay out in great detail what our own negotiating position should be. And I tried to find precedents in our own negotiating history. And I did some analysis of a negotiation which I was involved with in its later stages, which was the period of negotiations leading to the joint declaration on the future of Hong Kong in the early 1980s. There was at that time, as some members will remember, considerable concern about the economic future of Hong Kong under the sovereignty of Communist China, and therefore confidence, above all economic confidence, in the territory. But were any economic analyses of different scenarios published? No, not least because had they been done, all of them would surely at that time have made assumptions that any change in the existing arrangements would have been negative to the economy of Hong Kong, and therefore probably to the UK as well. In fact, today, 20 years after the handover, whatever our concerns might be about the commitment to some of the freedoms guaranteed under the joint declaration, Hong Kong has surely made significant economic progress. And my point, therefore, is that any analysis at that time would have been taken on consensus assumptions of the early 1980s, which would have been substantially wrong, and if published, would almost certainly have been an impediment to sensible, pragmatic, diplomatic negotiating compromise, which was then achieved to everybody's benefit. And in the same way today, the range of assumptions behind trying to calculate which future road in the negotiations will be most economically beneficial is almost impossible to calculate. And let me just give a few examples of the sort of questions you would have to consider. The latest statistics show that our current trade is 43% with the EU and 57% with the rest of the world. If our relationship with the EU did not change, if we were not leaving the EU, what would these figures be in 5 or 10 years? The figure for EU trade has declined, but would that continue or reverse? Would the strong projections for growth in Asia prove optimistic, accurate, or underestimate what will happen? Right now, we're exporting more goods than services, something unimaginable 5 years ago. But will that continue? And what would the different trends of goods and services, how would that affect our future trade across the world? With which countries would we benefit more if our goods were doing better than our services and vice versa? And when we leave the EU, who will we reach free trade agreements with? What other trading arrangements will we set up? For FTA is just one version of tools available to us. And how long will each of those agreements take? And what will their economic impact be? If we look at the area where I worked for the Prime Minister in Southeast Asia, will we be able to move faster, if we wanted to, in individual free trade agreements than the current progress of the EU? And what about the US, the biggest of them all? We know that the US executes 25% of its trade with the European Union, with the UK alone, and 50% of their financial services trade. Their interest in having a separate FTA with us will depend largely on the degree to which we offer something different, the degree to which we converge or have equivalence or have mutual recognition of the regulations and laws in the EU. So how, Sir David, I put to the House, how in this situation could we possibly know what an economic impact of various aspects of future potential scenarios with the EU will actually look like? I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving me. He seems to be arguing not for or against the publication of information, but against the whole idea of any kind of economic impact assessment at all. Kind of makes me wonder what the Chancellor's last budget statement was about. But if he's been consistent, is he also saying that none of the 16 economic impact analysis published by the government in the run-up to the Scottish independence referendum were worth the paper that they were written on, because they were also based on surmise and speculation?
I'm grateful to him for his contribution because, as a historian, he raises an interesting question. To what extent have economic forecasts ever been accurate? He might wish to study, if he wants to, the assessments of the OBR, which, on the whole, have been consistently gloomy over the period of the 8 years that I've been in this House. And I think he would be hard-pushed to find a record of any government successfully forecasting economically ahead, because by definition you have to make all sorts of assumptions, and I'm afraid in life so often it is, as a previous Prime Minister once remarked, events that shape things rather than our own forecasts of what the future might look like. And he brings me back helpfully to the point that I'm trying to make, Sir David, which is that all these forecasts, all these potential assessments of impacts depend on a huge number of variables. They will alter by individual company, by sector, by technology, and much else besides. And whatever any government trying to deliver such an assessment could come up with in terms of net benefits for different scenarios, they will invariably prove inaccurate, and therefore arriving at impact assessments in the definition that the government uses with clearly quantified conclusions and benefits would almost certainly prove misleading. Now, to publish such assessments is to share them with every negotiating partner of the UK, and would, I believe, be a huge own goal. I believe instead that what we should be expecting the government to do is to continue what it has been doing, to set out its strategy in broad terms, as the Prime Minister has done in her Lancaster House and Florence speeches, and that may need a third speech in due course, to shed light about what our government feels about these important words, convergence, alignment, equivalence and mutual recognition, that highlights the benefits of our services, not just to us, but to Europe, and indeed why a broad and deep partnership will benefit us both, including the sectors of defence, security, research, aerospace, nuclear energy, development, academia, and much besides. But I urge the government to resist commissioning an economic impact report and analyses of different potential scenarios of its negotiating strategy. And I urge this House, likewise, to resist asking for one. Would he wait a moment? Neither will help those charged with negotiating and delivering for our country a new relationship with the EU that will benefit citizens of Europe, wherever we live. And I say that as someone who has tried to defy the, I believe, unhelpful terms used earlier by the Shadow Minister, for whom I otherwise have considerable respect. I voted Remain because of the short-term risks to my constituents and our country. I voted for Article 50 to honour the result of the referendum. I support the Prime Minister because I trust her to steer us between the exaggerated descriptions of Hades and Nirvana during these negotiations. And therefore, I do not fall into the category of Brexiteer, extreme non-Brexiteer. I fall into the category of a Member of Parliament trying to help his constituents through what is an incredibly different period. And in this context, Sir David, I am grateful that the opposition is withdrawing Amendment 348 and hope they never come back to it.